Veltar crouched behind the rocky outcrop, his four eyes scanning the human military base below. His scaly green skin shifted color to match the red rocks of Kepler 442b, making him nearly invisible. The Zelani Empire had sent him here for one simple task: watch the humans and learn their weaknesses. The task seemed easy enough. Humans were new to the galaxy. They had only made contact with other alien species 5 years ago. Everyone knew they were weak, slow, and lived such short lives that they barely had time to learn anything useful. The Zelani had been fighting wars for thousands of years. What could these young creatures possibly teach them about battle? Veltar adjusted his observation device and focused on the human soldiers moving around the base. They looked even more pathetic than he had expected. Their skin was soft and easily damaged. They had only 2 eyes, which meant terrible vision compared to his 4. They moved slowly on just 2 legs instead of the efficient 4 that Zelani used. Most shocking of all, they had no natural armor, no claws, no poison glands. How had such weak beings even survived long enough to reach the stars? A group of human soldiers gathered near the main building. Veltar zoomed in to study them. The leader appeared to be a male with dark hair and serious eyes. The humans called him Sergeant Hyun Woo, according to the communications Veltar had been monitoring. Next to him stood a female soldier they called Corporal So Min. She was even smaller than the male, which seemed impossible. How could something so tiny be a warrior? There were others, too. Private Tai Yang looked like he was barely old enough to fight. His hands shook slightly as he held his weapon. The medic, Bo-Ra, carried medical supplies instead of extra weapons. Veltar shook his head in confusion. In Zelani military, only the strongest survived. The weak were left behind or given support roles far from battle. Yet here were humans putting their weakest members right on the front lines. Veltar settled in to watch their training exercises. He expected to see basic, clumsy movements. Instead, the humans moved with surprising coordination. Hyun Woo would give a hand signal, and immediately all the soldiers would change positions. They covered each other's movements and watched all directions at once. It was not bad for such primitive beings, but still nothing compared to Zelani. Precision. The alien observer was taking notes when alarms suddenly began blaring across the human base. Red lights flashed everywhere. Soldiers ran to defensive positions with speed that surprised Veltar. He quickly checked his sensors and felt his blood turn cold. A Corvani raiding party was approaching fast. 20 heavily armored Corvani warriors in powered battle suits, armed with plasma cannons and energy shields. Veltar almost felt sorry for the humans. The Corvani were known throughout the galaxy as brutal fighters. Their thick, rocky skin could stop most small weapons. Their plasma cannons could melt through steel. Each Corvani warrior was worth at least 5 normal soldiers. 20 of them against this small human base was not a battle. It was a massacre. The smart thing for the humans to do was retreat. Their base was not that important. They could evacuate and call for backup. Any reasonable military force would have been running already. Veltar waited to see how fast the humans would abandon their position, but the humans did not run. Instead, Hyunwoo was shouting orders to his soldiers. They took positions behind barriers and in buildings. So Min was setting up some kind of heavy weapon on the roof. Tai Yang and 2 other soldiers were doing something with the base's power systems. Bo-Ra was preparing medical supplies, as if she expected wounded soldiers instead of dead ones. Veltar was confused. Did the humans not understand how outmatched they were? Could they not count? 20 Corvani warriors should easily destroy 50 human soldiers, and this base had maybe 30 defenders. The Corvani attack began with a bombardment of plasma fire. The energy blasts lit up the landscape and shook the ground. Several human defensive positions were destroyed immediately. But instead of surrendering, the humans started shooting back with their primitive kinetic weapons. The bullets barely scratched Corvani armor, but the humans kept firing anyway. Then something strange happened. The humans began moving in ways that made no sense to Veltar. Instead of holding fixed positions like proper soldiers, they kept shifting and changing. A group would fire from one location, then quickly move to another spot before the Corvani could target them. They used smoke grenades to hide their movements and mirrors to confuse enemy targeting systems. Tai Yang did something to the base's main power grid that caused all the lights to go out. In the darkness, the humans seemed to move like ghosts. They knew their base so well that they could navigate perfectly without light, while the Corvani had to rely on their suit sensors. Somin's heavy weapon turned out to be some kind of electromagnetic pulse device. When she fired it, 3 Corvani suits shut down completely. The warriors inside were trapped in their own armor. Human soldiers immediately swarmed the disabled enemies, using metal rods to pry open the suit joints and disable the Corvani inside. But the most shocking thing was how the humans worked together. Veltar had never seen anything like it. They seemed to know what each other was thinking. Hyunwoo would start to turn toward a threat, and Somin would already be moving to cover that direction. Tai Yang would throw a grenade, and other soldiers would be ready to advance the moment it exploded. They moved like parts of one organism instead of individual fighters. The battle lasted 2 hours. When it ended, 15 Corvani warriors were dead or captured. The remaining 5 had retreated. The humans had lost only 4 soldiers, and 6 were wounded. By any reasonable calculation, this should have been impossible. Veltar stayed hidden, as the humans tended to their wounded and secured their prisoners. He watched Bo-Ra work to save a badly injured Corvani warrior, using the same care she gave to human patients. This confused him even more. Why would they help an enemy who had just tried to kill them? As night fell over the base, Veltar found himself staring at his notes. Everything he had written down about human weaknesses was still true. They were physically weak, slow, and fragile. Their weapons were primitive and their technology was basic. By every logical measure, they should have been crushed. Yet somehow, they had won. Veltar needed to understand how this was possible. His report to the Zalani Empire could not simply say that humans had won through luck. There had to be a reason, some factor he was missing. He decided to continue watching these strange creatures and learn their secrets. The alien soldier settled into his hiding place for a long observation mission. He had a feeling that humans were going to surprise him again. 3 days had passed since the Corvani attack, and Veltar was still watching the human base. He had expected them to call for reinforcements or abandon their position, but instead they were planning something new. The alien observer had intercepted their communications and learned about a rescue mission that made no sense at all. Captain Jin Ho, the base commander, was briefing his soldiers about civilians trapped in a Bruthari-occupied settlement called New Hope Colony. The Bruthari were massive, bear-like creatures with thick fur and powerful claws. They had taken the colony 3 days ago and were using the humans as slave labor. According to the intelligence reports, there were at least 100 Bruthari, soldiers guarding 200 human civilians. Veltar studied the mission plan and felt amazed by human stupidity. Jinho was planning to take only 20 soldiers to rescue the civilians. They had no air support, no heavy weapons, and no backup plan. The settlement was 40 kilometers away through dangerous terrain. Even if they reached it, fighting won. 100 Bruthari with 20 humans was suicide. Any reasonable military commander would wait for proper support or write off the civilians as acceptable losses. That was how war worked. You saved resources for battles you could win. But Jin-Ho was acting like saving those civilians was more important than tactical sense. The rescue team gathered their equipment. Veltar recognized some of the soldiers from the Corvani battle. Hyunwoo was leading a squad with So-min and Tae-yang under his command. There was also Specialist Hae-won, a small female who handled explosives, and Private Woo-jin, who seemed to be their communications expert. The humans loaded into their transport vehicles and headed toward the colony. Veltar followed at a distance, using his natural camouflage to stay hidden. He wanted to see how quickly this foolish mission would end in disaster. The journey took 6 hours through rough terrain. Twice the human convoy had to stop and find alternate routes when Bruthari patrols blocked their path. Instead of turning back, they kept going. Veltar began to think that humans might not understand the concept of giving up. When they reached the colony, Jin-Ho deployed his soldiers around the settlement's perimeter. Veltar positioned himself on a hill where he could observe the entire area. The colony was surrounded by a high fence with guard towers. Bruthari sentries patrolled the walls, and more guards were visible inside the compound. The humans were completely outnumbered. Jin-Ho's attack plan was surprisingly clever. Instead of a direct assault, the humans used distractions and misdirection. Tae-yang and 2 other soldiers created explosions on the far side of the settlement, drawing most of the Bruthari guards away from the main entrance. While the enemy was investigating the noise, Hae-won used small charges to blow holes in the fence at 3 different locations. The rescue teams moved into the colony through the breaches. They did not try to fight all the Bruthari at once. Instead, they moved quickly and quietly, gathering civilians and leading them to evacuation points. When Bruthari guards discovered them, the humans used hit-and-run tactics, striking fast and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. But then something went wrong. A Bruthari patrol discovered one of the evacuation groups and started shooting. The civilians were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Veltar expected the human soldiers to abandon the civilians and retreat to save themselves. Instead, Lieutenant Da-un threw herself between the Bruthari weapons and the civilians. She took multiple hits from enemy fire, her body armor smoking from the impacts. Other soldiers immediately moved to help her, even though it meant exposing themselves to danger. Veltar watched in disbelief as Hyunwoo and So-min charged directly at the Bruthari position. They were not trying to win the fight. They were trying to draw enemy fire away from the wounded Da-un and the civilians. It was tactically insane, but it worked. The Bruthari focused on the attacking soldiers, giving other humans time to evacuate the civilians. The battle for the colony became a running fight through the streets. The humans used every trick they could think of. Hae-won mixed medical supplies with ration chemicals to create improvised explosives. When their radios were jammed, Woo-jin started using hand signals and even bird calls to coordinate the teams. The soldiers seemed to understand these signals perfectly, as if they had practiced this kind of communication for years. What impressed Veltar most was how the humans adapted to each new problem. When Bruthari reinforcements arrived, the humans changed their escape routes. When the enemy tried to corner them in a building, they made new exits by blowing holes in the walls. Every time the Bruthari thought they had trapped the humans, the smaller creatures found a new way to escape. The most shocking moment came when Da-un was too badly wounded to move. She was bleeding heavily and needed immediate medical attention. The logical thing to do was leave her behind and save the soldiers who could still fight. That was basic military efficiency. But the humans refused to abandon her. Bora and two other soldiers carried Da-un while continuing to fight off Bruthari attacks. They slowed down their entire escape to save one wounded soldier. They risked the whole mission and all the civilians for a single person. Veltar tried to understand this behavior. In Zalani military doctrine, the mission always came first. Individual soldiers were replaceable resources. You saved who you could, but you did not throw away victory to rescue the wounded. Yet these humans seemed to believe that every single life was worth any risk. The rescue mission took 8 hours. When it was over, all 200 civilians had been evacuated safely. Da-un survived because of the medical attention she received during the escape. The humans had lost only 3 soldiers, while killing or wounding over 30 Bruthari. As the human convoy headed back to base with the rescued civilians, Veltar remained on his hill and tried to make sense of what he had witnessed. The humans had completed an impossible mission using inferior weapons and fewer soldiers. They had done it by working together in ways that seemed almost magical. But the most disturbing thing was their refusal to accept acceptable losses. They acted like every human life was irreplaceable, even when logic said otherwise. This was not efficient. It was not practical. By any reasonable military standard, it was wrong. Yet it had worked. Veltar began to suspect that there was something about human psychology that other species did not understand. These creatures did not fight like normal soldiers. They fought like something else entirely. The alien observer decided he needed to study this phenomenon more carefully. His reports to the Zalani Empire were becoming harder to write. How could? He explained that humans were dangerous not because they were strong, but because they refused to behave logically. How could he describe an enemy that became more determined when things got worse, instead of surrendering like reasonable beings? Veltar was starting to think that his superiors had made a serious mistake when they dismissed humans as a minor threat. These creatures might be weak individually, but together they were something else entirely. Something that might be very dangerous indeed. Veltar had been observing the human base for 2 weeks now, and their behavior continued to puzzle him. After the successful rescue mission, he expected the soldiers to become overconfident or careless. Instead, they seemed more focused than before. But they were also doing things that made no military sense. The alien observer watched through his scope as the humans dealt with the aftermath of their recent battles. Major Sung-ho, who had arrived from another base to take command, was holding what humans called memorial services for their fallen soldiers. The entire base gathered to honor 3 dead humans with speeches, music, and ceremonies. Veltar could not understand this behavior. The soldiers were dead. Honoring them would not bring them back or help win future battles. It was a waste of time and resources. Yet every human on the base attended these ceremonies, including the wounded who could barely stand. Even more confusing was how the humans treated their wounded. Private Minsu had taken shrapnel in his leg during the colony rescue and was walking, with difficulty. Instead of being assigned to easier duties, he was voluntarily taking extra guard shifts so his friend Jun-ho could recover from a head injury. Minsu was making his own injury worse to help another soldier. Sergeant Ye-jin was sharing her food rations with newer soldiers who had not yet learned to make their supplies last. She was giving away her own nutrition to help others, even though this made her weaker. No Zalani warrior would ever handicap themselves this way. The most disturbing behavior was how the humans treated their prisoners. The captured Corvani warriors were kept in comfortable cells, given medical treatment, and fed the same food as human soldiers. Veltar expected interrogation, torture, or execution. Instead, the humans were trying to communicate with their enemies and understand their culture. Bo-Ra, the medic, spent hours each day caring for wounded Corvani and Bruthari prisoners. She worked just as hard to save enemy lives as she did to save human lives. When one of the Corvani developed an infection, she used precious antibiotics to treat him. This was not just inefficient, it was actively helping the enemy. Veltar was trying to understand this strange psychology when the human base came under attack again. This time, it was his own people. A Zalani strike force had been sent to probe human defenses with a night raid. 30. Zalani warriors moved silently through the darkness, using their natural camouflage and superior night vision. The alien observer found himself in a difficult position. He should signal his fellow Zalani and help them attack the humans. But his mission was to observe, not fight. He decided to remain hidden and watch how the humans responded to a surprise assault by superior opponents. The Zalani attack began at midnight. The warriors moved like shadows, using their four-legged speed and climbing abilities to approach from unexpected angles. They should have been able to penetrate the human defenses easily and cause significant damage before withdrawing. But somehow, the humans were ready for them. Veltar watched in amazement as the human soldiers responded to the attack with perfect coordination. They did not panic or run around confused. Instead, they moved to defensive positions as if they had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times. Corporal Dong Hyun was positioned on the base's eastern wall. Without looking behind him, he stepped aside just as Specialist Hae Jin moved into position to cover an angle he could not see. Neither soldier had spoken or signaled to the other. They simply knew where the other would be and what they would do. Throughout the base, similar coordination was happening. Human soldiers were covering each other's blind spots, anticipating each other's movements, and working together with an efficiency that seemed impossible. They moved like parts of a single organism instead of individual fighters. The Zalani warriors found themselves facing defensive fire from directions they had not expected. Every time they tried to advance, human soldiers were already in position to stop them. Every time they tried to withdraw and reposition, other humans were waiting to cut them off. Veltar realized with growing shock that the humans were not just defending randomly. They were predicting Zalani tactics and countering them before they could be completed. But how was this possible? Humans had no neural linking technology like some species used. They had no telepathic abilities. They were just individual creatures with basic communication equipment. Yet they fought like they shared one mind. The battle lasted only 30 minutes. When it was over, 8 Zalani warriors were dead, and 5 were captured. The rest had retreated, in confusion. The humans had suffered only minor injuries and no deaths. They had defeated a superior force using nothing but teamwork and intuition. As dawn broke over the base, Veltar watched the humans secure their prisoners and tend their wounded. The captured Zalani were treated the same way as other enemy prisoners, with medical care and basic respect. No torture, no revenge, just professional military detention. One of the captured Zalani was badly wounded and might not survive. Bo-Ra worked for hours to stabilize him, using the same dedication she showed to human patients. She saved the life of a warrior who had just tried to kill her friends. Veltar began to realize that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Most species fought for resources, territory, or dominance. They used logic, technology, and superior force to achieve victory. But humans seemed to fight for abstract concepts that could not be measured or quantified. They talked about honor, freedom, and justice, as if these things were more important than tactical advantage. They risked their lives for principles that provided no physical benefit. They treated enemies with respect even when those enemies had shown them none. Most alien species became more cruel and ruthless during war. Combat brought out their predatory instincts and survival behaviors. But humans seemed to become more human during battle. They showed more compassion, more loyalty, and more determination to protect each other. Veltar started studying human communications and discovered something else that troubled him. The soldiers talked about fighting not just for their own people, but for all free beings in the galaxy. They spoke about protecting smaller species from aggressive empires and ensuring that every sentient creature had the right to live without fear. This was completely alien thinking to Veltar. The Zalani Empire fought to expand Zalani power and influence. Other species were either allies, enemies, or resources to be used. The idea of fighting for universal principles instead of tribal interests was foreign and disturbing. The alien observer realized that his reports to the Empire were becoming increasingly difficult to write. How could he explain that humans were dangerous not because they were technologically advanced or militarily superior, but because they believed in things that made no logical sense? How could he describe an enemy that became stronger when wounded, more united when attacked, and more determined when facing impossible odds? How could he warn his superiors about a species that fought for ideas instead of territory? Veltar was beginning to suspect that the Zalani Empire had made a fundamental error in its assessment of humanity. These creatures were not weak primitives who could be easily conquered or controlled. They were something else entirely. Something that might be more dangerous than any enemy the galaxy had ever seen. The alien soldier continued his surveillance, but now he was watching not just to gather intelligence for his empire. He was watching because he needed to understand what made these strange creatures so different from every other species in the galaxy, and he was starting to fear what he might discover. Veltar's reports to the Zalani Empire had been growing more and more concerned, but his superiors dismissed his warnings as exaggeration. The High Command believed that humans were still just primitive creatures with lucky tactics. To prove their point, they ordered a demonstration of overwhelming force that would finally break human resistance. The alien observer received new orders that made his blood run cold. The Zalani Empire had formed an alliance with the Bruthari clans and the Corvani Federation. Together, they would launch a massive assault designed not just to defeat human military forces, but to break their will to fight by targeting civilian populations. The target was New Sol Colony, a peaceful settlement of 50,000 humans on the planet's northern continent. It had no military value except as a symbol. The aliens planned to destroy it completely as a message to all humanity. Surrender or watch your people die. Veltar wanted to warn the humans, but he was bound by his oath to the Empire. He could only watch in horror as the three-species fleet moved into position above the colony. The attack would come without warning, giving the civilians no chance to evacuate. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. Plasma cannons and kinetic weapons rained down on New Sol Colony for 6 hours. When the bombardment ended, the beautiful settlement was a crater filled with burning ruins. 50,000 innocent humans were dead, including children, elderly, and families who had never held a weapon. Veltar monitored human communications channels, expecting to hear panic and calls for surrender. Instead, he heard something that chilled him to his core. The humans were not breaking. They were becoming angry. Commander Chang Min, the senior human officer in the sector, broadcast a message to all human forces. Veltar translated it and felt his hands shake as he read the words. Chang Min was not talking about retreat or negotiation. He was talking about revenge. The humans called it justice, but Veltar recognized it for what it was: a declaration of total war. The aliens had killed civilians to break human morale, but instead they had created an enemy that would never stop fighting until every last alien invader was dead or driven from human space. At the human base, Veltar was watching. The news of New Sol's destruction arrived within hours. The alien observer expected to see despair and defeat. Instead, he witnessed something that terrified him. The humans did not become weaker when they learned of the massacre. They became more dangerous. Private So Young, who had been cautious and careful in previous battles, began volunteering for the most dangerous missions. She told her squad leader that she no longer cared about survival, only about making the enemy pay for what they had done. Her eyes had a cold light that reminded Veltar of apex predators he had seen on his home world. Staff Sergeant Kyung-soo started training civilian volunteers in guerrilla warfare tactics. He was teaching farmers and shopkeepers how to build explosives, set ambushes, and attack enemy supply lines. The humans were turning their entire population into potential warriors. Colonel Mi-young was coordinating with other human worlds, not for evacuation or peace negotiations, but for a counterattack. She was planning something called Operation Righteous Fury that would bring every available human warship and soldier to this sector for one massive offensive. Veltar realized with growing horror that the alien alliance had made a catastrophic mistake. They thought that killing civilians would make humans more willing to surrender. Instead, they had convinced every human in the galaxy that aliens were monsters who could never be trusted or negotiated with. The alien observer watched human soldiers prepare for what they knew might be their final battle. But instead of fear or despair, he saw determination and grim purpose. They spoke about their dead friends and family members. They made promises to avenge the innocent civilians. They prepared to fight with the absolute certainty that their cause was just. Tai Yang, who had once been nervous and uncertain, now moved with deadly confidence. He was building improvised weapons and traps with creative skill that impressed even Veltar. The young human had learned to see every object as a potential tool for killing enemies. Hae-jin was modifying their communications equipment to coordinate with civilian resistance groups. She was turning the humans' entire population into an intelligence network that could track alien movements and identify targets for attack. But the most disturbing change was in how the humans talked about their enemies. Before the massacre, they had spoken about aliens as opponents to be defeated. Now they spoke about aliens as evil that had to be destroyed completely. They used words like extermination and cleansing that made Veltar's skin crawl. The human counteroffensive began 3 days after New Sol's destruction. Veltar watched in amazement as human warships appeared in the system, not just military vessels, but converted civilian ships, mining equipment, and cargo haulers that had been armed with weapons. Every human in the sector who could fly a ship had joined the attack. Captain Tae-ho led the assault on the Zalani command ship. His ship was damaged and his crew was wounded, but he kept pressing the attack even when retreat would have been wise. Veltar realized that Tejo was not trying to win a tactical victory. He was trying to kill as many aliens as possible before he died. The space battle was unlike anything Veltar had ever seen. Human ships used ramming attacks and suicide runs. That should have been impossible to coordinate, but somehow the humans turned their own deaths into weapons against their enemies. Every human ship that was destroyed took at least one alien vessel with it. On the ground, human forces attacked with a ferocity that shocked the alien alliance. They showed no mercy to enemies and took no prisoners. They fought like creatures, possessed by demons, using their own bodies as weapons when their guns ran out of ammunition. Sergeant Inho led a ground assault against a Bruthari position. His squad was outnumbered 3-1, but they attacked anyway. They used explosives, fire and hand-to-hand combat to destroy enemies who were bigger and stronger than they were. When Inho ran out of ammunition, he used a broken piece of metal as a knife. The aliens had expected humans to fight like normal military forces, with strategy and self-preservation guiding their actions. Instead, they faced an enemy that fought like an avenging force of nature. The humans seemed to care more about killing aliens than about surviving the battle. Within a week, the alien alliance forces in the sector were destroyed or in full retreat. The humans had won a complete victory using nothing but rage and determination. They had turned their grief over New Sol into a weapon more powerful than any technology. As Veltar watched the human ships pursue the fleeing alien fleets, he realized that the galaxy had changed forever. The alien powers had created an enemy that would never forgive and never forget. They had turned humanity from a minor species into a force of vengeance that would hunt them across the stars. The alien observer began to understand that his people had made a mistake that could not be corrected. They had taught humans to hate, and humans were very good at learning. The massacre at New Sol was supposed to end human resistance. Instead, it had begun a war that would only end when one side was completely destroyed. Veltar looked at his communication device and realized he could no longer send reports to the Zalani Empire. What could he tell them? That they had awakened something terrible? That humanity was no longer interested in coexistence or negotiation, that they had created an enemy that would pursue them to the ends of the galaxy for revenge? The alien soldier continued watching the human base, but now he was no longer an observer gathering intelligence. He was a witness to the birth of something new and terrifying in the galaxy, a species that had learned to hate with the same intensity that they had once shown love. The human counteroffensive had been devastating. In just 2 weeks, the combined alien fleets had been scattered across 3 star systems. Veltar monitored the communications traffic and learned that similar victories were happening throughout human space. The species that everyone had dismissed as weak primitives was destroying military forces that had conquered dozens of worlds. But Veltar was beginning to realize that his own position was becoming dangerous. Human patrols were getting closer to his hiding spot each day. Their detection equipment was improving, and their search patterns were becoming more thorough. Soon, they would find him. The alien observer was considering how to retreat safely when the decision was taken away from him. A human patrol led by Sergeant Inho discovered his camouflaged position during a routine sweep. Veltar found himself surrounded by 6 human soldiers with weapons pointed at his head. In Zalani culture, capture meant death or slavery. Prisoners were either executed immediately or kept alive for manual labor until they died. Veltar prepared himself for torture and interrogation, followed by a painful death. These humans had just lost 50,000 civilians to alien attacks. They would want revenge. But the humans did something that shocked him more than anything else he had witnessed. They did not kill him. Instead, they carefully disarmed him and secured him with restraints that were firm but not painful. When he struggled and tried to bite one of the soldiers, they used a stun weapon that left him unconscious but unharmed. When he woke up, he was in a clean cell with food, water, and medical attention for injuries he had received during his capture. Medic. Yonseo examined his wounds with the same professional care she gave to human patients. She did not speak his language, but she used gestures and simple sounds to let him know that she was trying to help him. When he flinched away from her touch, she moved slowly and gave him time to understand that she meant no harm. Translator. Gunwoo arrived within hours and began the slow process of establishing communication. The human spoke several alien languages poorly, but he was patient and persistent. He used computer translation programs, gesture, and drawing to bridge the gap between their species. Veltar expected interrogation about military secrets, troop positions, and battle plans. Instead, the humans asked him about his people, his culture, and his personal background. They seemed genuinely curious about Zilani society and how his species viewed the war. When Gunwoo learned that Veltar had been watching the human base for weeks, the translator asked why the alien had not been detected sooner. Veltar reluctantly explained his camouflage abilities and observation techniques. The human response amazed him. Gunwoo smiled and said that they had known about Veltar's presence for almost the entire time. They had allowed him to continue his surveillance because they hoped he would report back to his superiors with accurate information about human intentions. "We wanted your people to understand that we do not seek conquest," Gunwoo explained through the translation device. "We only fight when attacked. We had hoped that observation would lead to communication instead of war." Veltar felt his worldview cracking. The humans had known he was there and had chosen not to capture him because they wanted peace. This made no sense, according to everything he knew about warfare and military psychology. Lieutenant Colonel Sang-hyun arrived to speak with Veltar personally. The human commander was polite but direct. He explained that the alien alliance's attack on New Seoul Colony had changed everything. Humanity could no longer trust that aliens wanted peaceful coexistence. "Your people killed our children," Sang-hyun said quietly. "They destroyed a colony full of families who had never hurt anyone. This was not warfare. It was murder. Now we must decide what happens next." The human commander offered Veltar a choice that no alien prisoner had ever been given before. He could return to his people with a message about human intentions and capabilities, or he could remain as a liaison to help prevent further bloodshed between the species. "We do not want to destroy the Zilani Empire," Sang-hyun explained. "We want them to leave us alone. If your people withdraw from human space and stop attacking civilians, we can discuss peace. But if they continue this war, we will fight until every alien ship is destroyed or driven away." Veltar asked why the humans would trust him with such important information. He was their enemy. He had been spying on them for weeks. Why would they give him a chance to escape and warn his people? Sang-hyun's answer disturbed Veltar more than any weapon could have. "Because we believe that every sentient being deserves a chance to choose between peace and war, even our enemies. Even after what your alliance did to New Seoul." The alien observer was taken to see the human medical facilities where wounded soldiers from both sides received treatment. Private Yoonji was caring for injured Korvani and Bruthari prisoners with the same dedication she showed to human patients. She cleaned wounds, administered pain medication, and provided comfort to beings who had recently been trying to kill her. When a badly wounded Zalani warrior was brought in, Yunji worked for 6 hours to save his life. She used precious medical supplies and her own blood for transfusions to keep the alien alive. When other humans asked why she was working so hard to save an enemy, she simply said that it was the right thing to do. Veltar watched this scene and finally understood what made humans so dangerous. It was not their weapons or their tactics or their adaptability. It was their stubborn, irrational belief that every life had value, even the lives of their enemies. This was not logical. It was not efficient. It made no sense from a military perspective. But it gave humans something that no other species in the galaxy possessed: the absolute certainty that their cause was morally correct. They fought not for conquest or resources or tribal dominance, but for principles that they believed applied to all sentient life. They were willing to die for the idea that every being deserved freedom, dignity, and the right to live without fear. This made them impossible to defeat in any conventional sense. You could destroy their ships and kill their soldiers, but you could not break their will as long as they believed they were fighting for universal justice. Veltar realized that his choice would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the future of both species. He could return to the Zalani Empire and warn them that humans were more dangerous than anyone imagined. Or he could stay and try to build a bridge between two species that had already spilled too much blood. After 3 days of consideration, Veltar made his decision. He told Sang-hyun that he would remain as a liaison and work to prevent further war between humans and aliens. The human commander asked why he had chosen to stay instead of returning to his own people. Veltar explained that he had learned something during his time watching humans that he could not ignore. "Your species fights for something bigger than yourselves," the alien said through Gunwoo's translation. "You believe that war should have moral purpose, not just strategic advantage. This is new in the galaxy. This is important." Veltar began his new role as the first alien ally of humanity. He helped translate communications, explained alien military tactics, and served as proof that cooperation between species was possible. But more importantly, he became a witness to something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had entered the cosmic stage not as conquerors or victims, but as a moral force that insisted every sentient being deserved basic rights and dignity. In a galaxy full of species driven by logic, efficiency, and survival instinct, humans offered something different: hope. They proved that advanced civilizations did not have to abandon compassion to be strong. They showed that the greatest weapon was not technology or numbers, but the unshakable belief that right would triumph over might. Veltar's reports to his former superiors would never be sent. Instead, he spent his time learning about human culture and helping build a foundation for peace between species who had been enemies. The alien soldier who had come to observe human weakness had discovered human strength. And in that strength, he had found something worth fighting for himself.